Naomi Fletcher stood frozen in the first-class aisle, staring at the blonde woman sprawled across her seat. The woman's diamond bracelet caught the cabin light as she waved dismissively. Security was coming. The passengers were recording. In 60 seconds, this entitled stranger would discover she had just stolen a seat from the woman who owned every plane in the sky. Every single one. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments, because I love seeing where our community is tuning in from around the globe. And if you're ready to see how this situation unfolds in the most shocking way possible, go ahead and smash that like button right now. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because stories like this need to be heard, shared, and remembered. Trust me, you won't believe what happens next. Now, let's get into it. The morning started, like any other Tuesday, for Naomi Fletcher. She woke up at 5 in the morning in her Midtown Atlanta apartment, went through her usual routine of coffee and morning news, and headed to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport by 6:15. At 38 years old, Naomi had built something most people only dreamed about. She was the founder and CEO of Skyward Elite Airlines, a premium carrier that catered to business travelers who valued luxury, efficiency, and impeccable service. But Naomi's journey to the top hadn't been paved with gold. She grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, in a neighborhood where opportunity was scarce and dreams often died young. Her mother worked double shifts as a hotel housekeeper, scrubbing toilets and changing sheets for guests who never learned her name. Her father passed away when Naomi was 12 because they couldn't afford the medical treatment that might have saved his life. Those early years taught Naomi something crucial about America. Hard work mattered, but so did the color of your skin. And if you were black, you had to work 10 times harder just to be seen as equal. Naomi earned a full scholarship to MIT, where she studied aerospace engineering. She was often the only black woman in her classes, enduring sidelong glances and questions about whether she really belonged there. After graduation, she worked for 2 major airlines, rising through the ranks despite being passed over for promotions that went to less qualified white colleagues. Finally, 5 years ago, she decided to stop waiting for permission. She would build her own airline. The road was brutal. Naomi approached 47 banks before she found one willing to give her a business loan. Investors told her she lacked experience, but what they really meant was that she didn't look like the other airline CEOs. They were all white men in expensive suits who'd inherited their opportunities. Naomi was a black woman who'd clawed her way up from nothing. But she persisted. She found investors who believed in her vision. She assembled a team of brilliant professionals. And she launched Skyward Elite with 3 planes and a promise to deliver excellence. 5 years later, Skyward Elite operated 23 aircraft, employed over 800 people, and generated hundreds of millions in annual revenue. Naomi had proven every doubter wrong. But success didn't shield her from racism. It just meant she encountered it in first class instead of economy. That morning, Naomi dressed in a tailored gray suit and carried a Louis Vuitton bag she'd bought to celebrate her company's first profitable quarter. She wore her natural hair in elegant box braids and minimal makeup. She looked professional, polished, and successful. But as she approached the check-in counter at the airport, she could already feel the familiar weight of judgment. The man behind the counter, whose name tag read Garrett, looked up at her with barely concealed suspicion. His eyes swept over her, taking in her skin color before anything else. Naomi handed him her identification and boarding pass. Garrett examined them slowly, then looked back at her face as if trying to match the two. "First class?" he asked, his tone suggesting disbelief. "Yes," Naomi replied calmly. She'd learned long ago not to show irritation. Anger from a black woman was always perceived as aggression. Garrett typed something into his computer, frowned, and typed again. He picked up her ID, and held it up to the light, as if checking for forgery. "Are you sure this ticket is yours?" Naomi felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise in her chest. "Yes, I'm sure. It's just that we've had some issues with fraudulent tickets lately," Garrett said, though his eyes told a different story. He didn't think the ticket was fake. He thought she couldn't afford it. "The ticket is legitimate," Naomi said firmly. "May I have my boarding pass, please?" Garrett hesitated, then reluctantly printed her boarding pass and handed it over with a look that said he still didn't quite believe her. Naomi took it without another word and headed toward security. The security checkpoint brought more of the same. While white passengers breezed through with quick bag checks and polite smiles, Naomi was pulled aside by a TSA agent named Lloyd for a random screening. She watched as 3 white businessmen passed through without a second glance, while Lloyd methodically unpacked her carry-on, examining every item as if she were smuggling contraband. "Is there a problem?" Naomi asked after 12 minutes of this treatment. "Just following protocol, ma'am," Lloyd replied, though they both knew this had nothing to do with protocol and everything to do with profiling. When Naomi finally made it through security, she was exhausted and she hadn't even boarded yet. She checked her watch. Still 40 minutes until departure. She walked to gate C-42 and stood by the enormous windows, looking out at the planes on the tarmac. One of them was hers. A Skyward elite aircraft with the distinctive gold and navy livery Shed personally designed. The logo gleamed in the morning sunlight. For a moment, pride swelled in her chest. She had built this. Against all odds, she had created something beautiful and successful. But that pride was tempered by the reality of what Shed just experienced. Even here, at her own airline's gate, nobody recognized her. Nobody saw the CEO. They just saw a black woman, and they made assumptions. The gate agent, a woman named Francine with platinum blonde hair and too much perfume, called for first-class boarding. Naomi gathered her bag and approached the desk. She handed over her boarding pass. Francine scanned it, glanced at the screen, then looked at Naomi with barely disguised skepticism. "First class," Francine said, her voice dripping with doubt. "Really?" Naomi didn't respond. She simply waited while Francine scanned the pass again, as if hoping the computer would reveal some mistake. Finally, Francine handed back the boarding pass with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Enjoy your flight," she said in a tone that suggested she hoped Naomi wouldn't. Naomi walked down the jet bridge, her heels clicking against the floor. She could hear other passengers behind her, their conversations light and carefree. They weren't worried about being questioned or doubted. They belonged in first class. Or at least, that's what the world told them. When Naomi stepped onto the plane, a flight attendant named Bethany greeted her with a smile that faltered slightly when she saw Naomi's face. "Welcome aboard," Bethany said, but her eyes were already scanning Naomi's boarding pass as if looking for proof that she didn't belong. Naomi nodded and walked into the first-class cabin. It was beautifully appointed, with leather seats, mood lighting, and elegant wood accents. Shed personally overseen every design choice, from the color scheme to the seat configuration. This was her creation, her dream made real. She found her row, seat 2A. The window seat Shed specifically selected because she liked watching takeoff. But as she approached, her steps slowed. Someone was already sitting there. A white woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes, and a champagne flute in her hand. The woman looked up at Naomi with cold blue eyes and a smile that didn't hide her contempt. This was the moment everything changed. Naomi stood in the aisle, looking down at the woman in her seat. She took a breath, reminding herself to stay calm, stay professional. "Excuse me," she said politely. "I believe you're in my seat, This is 2A. The woman, who radiated wealth and entitlement from every pore, looked Naomi up and down with unconcealed disdain. She took a slow sip of her champagne before responding. "I don't think so, sweetie," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "My seat is right here." Naomi held up her boarding pass. "My boarding pass says 2A. This is my assigned seat." The woman glanced at the boarding pass, then waved her hand dismissively. "Well, there must be some mistake. I always fly first class." She emphasized the word always, as if it were a badge of honor that excluded people like Naomi. "I understand," Naomi replied, keeping her voice level. "But this is my assigned seat. Could you please check your ticket?" The woman rolled her eyes dramatically. "I don't need to check anything. I've been flying first class for 20 years. I know where my seat is." A man across the aisle, seated in 1B, looked over with interest. He was middle-aged, white, wearing an expensive suit. His name was Hugh, though Naomi didn't know that yet. He sized up the situation quickly, his eyes moving between Naomi and the blonde woman. Without hesitation, he sided with the woman. "Maybe you should just find another seat, miss," Hugh said to Naomi. "She was here first." Naomi felt her jaw tighten. "Sir, I have the correct seat assignment." "She's in my seat," Hugh snorted. "She was here first. Don't make a scene." The blonde woman smiled triumphantly, settling deeper into seat 2A as if to stake her claim. She smoothed her designer skirt and crossed her legs, the picture of casual superiority. Other passengers were starting to notice now. A woman in 3C whispered something to her husband, both of them looking at Naomi with expressions that clearly said they thought she was the problem. A younger man in 4B had his phone out, probably recording. The situation was escalating, and Naomi knew she had to get help. "Excuse me." Naomi called to a flight attendant passing by. It was Bethany, the same attendant who'd greeted her at the door. "This passenger is sitting in my seat, 2A. Bethany approached, her smile professional but her eyes wary. She looked at Naomi, then at the blonde woman, then back at Naomi. There was a moment of hesitation, a flash of bias that crossed her face so quickly most people wouldn't have noticed. But Naomi saw it. She'd seen it her whole life. Bethany had already decided who to believe. "Mom, are you sure this is your seat?" Bethany asked Naomi. "Yes, I'm sure," Naomi said, holding out her boarding pass again. 2A. Window seat. First class. Bethany took the boarding pass and examined it carefully. She looked confused, as if the evidence in her hand contradicted what she'd expected to see. "Let me check with the gate," she said finally. "Please wait here." The blonde woman spoke up then, her voice sweet but sharp. "Take your time, dear. Some people just don't understand how first class works." She said it loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The implication was clear. Naomi didn't belong here. Naomi was causing trouble. Naomi was the problem. Naomi stood in the aisle, her bag still on her shoulder, feeling the weight of every eye in the cabin. The other first-class passengers were watching her like she was an intruder, a threat to their exclusive space. Nobody asked the blonde woman to show her ticket. Nobody questioned whether she belonged. Because in their world, white skin was all the credential you needed. Bethany returned a moment later with the flight's purser, a man named Vincent. He was in his mid-40s with graying hair and a stern expression. "Ma'am," he said to Naomi, "what seems to be the problem?" Before Naomi could respond, the blonde woman spoke up. "This woman is claiming my seat. I've been sitting here for 10 minutes, enjoying my champagne, and now she's trying to kick me out." Vincent looked at Naomi. "Do you have your boarding pass?" Naomi handed it to him, her patience wearing thin. Vincent examined it, checked his tablet, and frowned. "This does say 2A," he admitted. "Thank you," Naomi said. Vincent turned to the blonde woman. "Mom, may I see your boarding pass?" The woman hesitated. She made a show of digging through her enormous Hermes handbag, taking her time as if she couldn't quite remember where Shed put it. Finally, she produced a boarding pass and handed it to Vincent with a huff of indignation. Vincent looked at it, then looked at his tablet again. His expression shifted. "Mom, your seat is 8C. That's in economy." The cabin went silent. The blonde woman's face flushed red. "That's impossible," she sputtered. "I booked first class. I always book first class. According to our system, you purchased an economy ticket," Vincent said calmly. The woman stood up abruptly, her champagne glass sloshing. "This is ridiculous. Someone made a mistake. I paid for first class." She pointed at Naomi. "And she probably got some kind of charity upgrade or something." The words hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Charity upgrade. The implication was clear. There was no way Naomi could afford first class on her own. There was no way she belonged here. She must have received special treatment, some kind of handout. Naomi felt her blood boil, but she kept her face neutral. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I paid for this seat with my money." "Oh, please," the woman scoffed. "We all know how this works." Hugh from seat 1B chimed in again. "Can't we just move her to another seat?" He meant Naomi, not the woman who was actually in the wrong seat. "She's holding up the flight." "Sir," Vincent said, his voice strained, "this passenger has the correct seat assignment." "Well, someone needs to handle this situation," Hugh insisted. Bethany leaned close to Vincent and whispered something. Naomi couldn't hear the exact words, but she heard enough. "Should we call security?" And Bethany was looking at her when she said it. Not at the woman who'd taken the wrong seat. Not at Hugh, who was escalating the situation. At Naomi, the black woman who dared to insist on her rights. "Call security," Naomi repeated, her voice rising slightly despite her best efforts. "I'm the one with the correct seat." Vincent pulled out his radio. "We need assistance in first class," he said quietly. Naomi couldn't believe what was happening. She was about to be removed from her own airplane because a white woman had stolen her seat, and everyone automatically believed the white woman over her. This was her company, her plane, her seat, and she was being treated like a criminal. 2 security officers appeared at the front of first class within minutes. They were both men, one named Terrence and the other Rodrigo. They approached with serious expressions, hands resting on their belts in a way that made their authority clear. "What's going on here?" Terrence asked. Vincent gestured vaguely. "We have a seating dispute. This passenger is refusing to take her assigned seat." He was pointing at Naomi, not at the blonde woman who was still standing in the aisle looking victorious. At Naomi, who had done nothing wrong except be black in first class. "What?" Naomi said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "No. Shez in my seat. I have the boarding pass. I have the assignment." She admitted her seat is in economy. Terrence approached Naomi. "Mom, we need you to calm down." "I am calm," Naomi said, though her heart was racing. "I'm just trying to sit in my assigned seat." "Mom, if you don't cooperate, we'll have to remove you from the flight," Rodrigo added. The blonde woman, still standing near seat 2A, smiled slightly. Shed won, or so she thought. Naomi looked around the first-class cabin. Every face was turned toward her. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked annoyed. A few looked smug. But nobody was standing up for her. Nobody was pointing out the obvious injustice happening right in front of them. The young man in 4B was definitely recording now, his phone held up openly. A woman in 5A clutched her husband's arm, watching the scene unfold like it was a reality TV show. Hugh from 1B shook his head in disgust, as if Naomi were personally inconveniencing him. And the blonde woman, the one who'd started this entire mess by stealing a seat she hadn't paid for, stood there with her arms crossed and a self-satisfied expression on her face. "Officers," Naomi said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I understand. This looks confusing. But I assure you, I am in the right seat, according to my boarding pass. This woman is in my seat. Her ticket is for economy. I can prove it." Terrence sighed heavily. "Mom, the other passenger was here first. She's settled in. Can't you just take a different seat?" "No," Naomi said firmly. "I can't just take a different seat. This is the seat I paid for. This is the seat I was assigned. Why should I be the one to move when I did nothing wrong?" "Because you're making a scene," Rodrigo said bluntly. The accusation stung because it was so deeply unfair. Naomi wasn't making a scene. She was standing up for herself. She was insisting on being treated with the same respect as every other passenger. But because she was black, her self-advocacy was being labeled as aggression. Her reasonable request was being treated as unreasonable. "I'm not making a scene," Naomi said quietly. "I'm asking for what's mine." The blonde woman spoke up again, her voice loud and indignant. "I can't believe this. I've been a loyal customer of this airline for years. I know people. I know the CEO." It was a bluff. The woman had never flown Skyward Elite before. This was her first time, and she'd bought the cheapest economy ticket available. But she said it with such confidence that some passengers nodded in agreement. "When I report this incident, heads will roll," the woman continued dramatically. "I have friends in high places. I will not be treated this way." Hugh stood up from his seat. "That's right. This is completely unacceptable. First-class passengers shouldn't have to deal with this." A man in 3A, whose name was Coleman, added his voice to the chorus. "Just give her a different seat." "Why is this so complicated? Why should I move when I have the correct seat?" Naomi asked, looking directly at Coleman. "Because you're holding everyone up," Coleman replied, as if that explained everything. Bethany wrung her hands nervously. "Mame, we're going to miss our departure time. Other passengers need to board." Vincent looked pained. "Mom, perhaps we can find you a comparable seat elsewhere in the cabin." "I don't want a comparable seat," Naomi said. "I want my seat. The one I paid for. The one assigned to me." The standoff continued. The security officers stood on either side of Naomi like she was a threat to be contained. The blonde woman remained near seat 2A, her territory successfully defended, and Naomi stood in the aisle, bag still on her shoulder, fighting a battle that should never have been necessary. This was the moment Naomi had to make a choice. She could back down, accept the injustice, move to another seat just to keep the peace. It was what people expected her to do. It was what black people were always expected to do. Accommodate, bend, make ourselves smaller so others could feel comfortable. Or she could fight. She could expose what was really happening here. She could force everyone in this cabin to confront their bias, their assumptions, their automatic belief that she didn't belong. Naomi thought about her mother, scrubbing toilets in hotel bathrooms while wealthy guests looked through her like she was invisible. She thought about her father, dying because poverty and racism had denied him access to health care. She thought about every door slammed in her face, every loan denied, every investor who'd dismissed her, every person who'd told her she couldn't build an airline because women like her didn't do things like that. And she made her choice. "I need to speak with Vincent privately," Naomi said, her voice calm but authoritative. Vincent looked surprised. "Mom, We don't have time for it's about the airline. Naomi interrupted. It's important. Very important. Something in her tone made Vincent pause. He studied her face, seeing something he'd missed before. All right, he said slowly. Step into the galley. They moved to the small galley kitchen area at the front of first class, partially out of view from the other passengers. The blonde woman watched them go with narrowed eyes, suspicious that Naomi was trying some kind of trick. Naomi opened her bag and pulled out her wallet. From it, she extracted a business card and handed it to Vincent. He took it, glanced down, and froze. His eyes widened, his face went pale. He looked up at Naomi, down at the card, then up again. The card was simple, elegant, professional. It read, Naomi Fletcher, Chief Executive Officer and Founder, Skyward Elite Airlines. You're, Vincent whispered, his voice barely audible. You're Miss Fletcher. Naomi nodded. Yes, I'm the CEO. I own this airline. I own this plane. And that woman is sitting in my seat on my airplane. Vincent's hand trembled slightly. Oh my God. Miss Fletcher, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I know you didn't know, Naomi said quietly. Nobody ever knows. They see my skin before they see anything else. I apologize. Vincent said, his voice shaking. This is unacceptable. The way you've been treated is completely unacceptable. Yes, it is, Naomi agreed. And it's not just about me. It's about every black passenger who flies on any airline. Every person who looks like me and gets questioned, doubted, treated like they don't belong. Vincent nodded vigorously. You're absolutely right. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to pull rank, Naomi continued. I wanted to be treated like any other passenger with a valid ticket. But it's clear that's not going to happen. Not because of anything I did wrong, but because of assumptions based on my race. What do you want me to do? Vincent asked. Naomi took a breath. I want this handled properly. I want that woman moved to her correct seat. I want an acknowledgement that this was wrong. And I want everyone in this cabin to understand what just happened here. Done, Vincent said immediately. Absolutely done. They emerged from the galley together. The entire first-class cabin fell silent, all eyes on them. The blonde woman straightened up, ready to defend her position. Hugh looked annoyed at the delay. The security officers stood waiting for instructions. Vincent cleared his throat. His voice, when he spoke, was loud and clear and carried the weight of authority. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Every passenger in first class turned their full attention to Vincent. The chatter died instantly. Even the blonde woman, still standing possessively near seat 2A, went quiet. Phones were out now, multiple passengers recording what they sensed was about to become a significant moment. I need to clarify an important matter, Vincent began, his professional demeanor firmly in place. There has been a seating issue that needs to be resolved immediately. The blonde woman interrupted. Finally, I've been saying that this whole time. She needs to go back to economy where she belongs. Vincent turned to face her directly. Mom, you are currently sitting in seat 2A, which is not your assigned seat. Your ticket clearly indicates seat 8C in the economy cabin. That's a mistake, the woman protested. I booked first class. No, ma'am, you did not, Vincent said firmly. Our system shows you purchased an economy ticket. You deliberately sat in a first-class seat without authorization. This is ridiculous. The woman's face was turning red. I've told you. I know people. I know the CEO of this airline. Do you? Vincent asked quietly. There was something in his tone that made several passengers lean forward. Yes. And when I tell them about this disaster, you'll be fired. Vincent took a breath. Mom, You don't know the CEO. But she's standing right here. The cabin went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The blonde woman blinked in confusion. What? Vincent gestured to Naomi. This is Miss Naomi Fletcher. She is the chief executive officer and founder of Skyward Elite Airlines. She owns this company. She owns this airplane. She owns every single aircraft you see on this tarmac, with our logo. The words landed like a bomb. The blonde woman's mouth fell open. Her champagne glass slipped from her fingers, but she caught it at the last second, spilling liquid on her designer blouse. Hugh from seat 1B sat frozen, his expression one of pure shock. Coleman in 3A suddenly became very interested in his shoes. Bethany, the flight attendant, turned bright red. The woman in 5A, who'd been filming, gasped audibly. The young man in 4B zoomed in on Naomi's face with his phone camera. And Naomi stood tall, shoulders back, meeting every eye in the cabin. She owns, the blonde woman repeated weakly. She owns the airline. Every part of it. Vincent confirmed. Miss Fletcher founded Skyward Elite 5 years ago. She built this company from the ground up. She designed these cabins, selected these routes, hired every employee. And today, she was trying to sit in her assigned seat, 2A, which she rightfully purchased, when she was treated with disrespect and suspicion by multiple people, including our staff. Naomi stepped forward. Her voice was calm, measured, but carried steel underneath. My name is Naomi Fletcher. I am the CEO of this airline. And I've spent the last hour being questioned, doubted, and nearly removed from my own airplane because everyone assumed I didn't belong here. Not because of anything I did, but because of how I look. The silence was deafening. Several passengers looked away, unable to meet her gaze. The blonde woman seemed to shrink. Her earlier bravado completely evaporated. Miss Palmer, Naomi said, addressing the blonde woman directly. That is your name, isn't it? Judith Palmer. The woman nodded mutely. Miss Palmer, you took a seat you didn't pay for. When I politely asked you to move, you refused. You suggested I had received a charity upgrade. You implied I didn't belong in first class. You said, and I quote, "We all know how this works." Judith's face was now completely white. I didn't mean... Yes, you did, Naomi said quietly. You meant exactly what you said. You saw a black woman and assumed she couldn't afford first class. You felt entitled to my seat because, in your world, you belong here and people who look like me don't. Before we continue with what happened next, I want to ask you something. Comment number 1 if you think Naomi was right to reveal her identity. Comment number 2 if you think she should have stayed quiet and just moved to another seat. Because here's the thing. This happens every single day to black travelers, to people of color, to anyone who doesn't fit society's narrow idea of who belongs in spaces of privilege. And the question is, should they have to prove themselves? Should they have to show credentials just to be treated with basic respect? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story is making you feel something, hit that like button and subscribe because we need to talk about these issues. We need to shine a light on the everyday racism that so many people face. Now, what do you think happened next? Did Judith Palmer apologize? Did the other passengers realize their mistake? And what about the crew members who'd been ready to throw Naomi off her own plane? Stay with me, because this is where things get really interesting. Naomi watched the emotions play across Judith Palmer's face. Shock, embarrassment, fear, and finally, the beginning of understanding. The entire first-class cabin remained frozen, waiting to see what would happen next. Miss Palmer. Naomi continued, her voice steady. You need to gather your belongings and move to your assigned seat, 8C, in the economy cabin, right now. Judith nodded, moving like someone in a dream. Her hands shook as she picked up her champagne glass and set it on the tray. She grabbed her oversized Hermes bag, nearly dropping it in her haste. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know. I didn't realize." "You didn't know I was the CEO," Naomi corrected her. "But that's not the point. You shouldn't need to know someone's title or position to treat them with respect. I could have been anyone. A teacher, a nurse, a small business owner who saved up for months to afford this ticket. Would that have made your behavior acceptable?" Judith shook her head, tears beginning to form in her eyes. No, it wouldn't have. "Every passenger on this plane deserves dignity," Naomi said. "Regardless of their race, their occupation, their wealth. That's not just company policy. That's basic human decency." Judith Palmer hurried down the aisle toward economy, her head down, her expensive heels clicking rapidly against the floor. As she passed other first-class passengers, several turned away, not wanting to be associated with her behavior. Naomi finally moved to her seat, 2A, and sat down. The leather was soft, the space generous. She'd spent months researching the perfect seats for first class, testing dozens of models before selecting these. Every detail in this cabin reflected her vision, her standards, her dream. And now, finally, she could sit in peace. But she wasn't done yet. "I want to address something else," Naomi said, standing back up so everyone could see her. "Many of you witnessed what happened. Some of you participated. And I need you all to understand what took place here today." Hugh from seat 1B looked like he wanted to disappear into his seat. His earlier confidence had completely vanished. "When I boarded this plane, I was treated with suspicion from the moment I presented my boarding pass. The gate agent questioned whether my ticket was real. Miss Palmer took my seat and refused to move, suggesting I couldn't possibly afford first class. And when I asked for help, several of you assumed I was the problem, not the woman who'd stolen my seat. Me, the black woman who had the audacity to insist on her rights. The woman in 5A, whose name was Vivian, spoke up hesitantly. "You're right. I'm ashamed to say I made assumptions too. I'm sorry." Naomi nodded in acknowledgement. "Thank you for saying that. Apologizing is important. But more important is understanding why those assumptions happened in the first place." She turned to address the entire cabin. "I face this everywhere I go. In boardrooms where I'm the only black woman and people assume I'm the assistant, not the CEO. At conferences where attendees try to hand me their dirty plates, thinking I'm catering staff. On airplanes, where people look at my skin and decide I don't belong in first class. This is the reality for black professionals across America. We're constantly required to prove ourselves, to show our credentials, to justify our presence in spaces where white people are automatically assumed to belong." Coleman from 3A cleared his throat. "Miss Fletcher, I apologize. I was wrong to suggest you should just move. I didn't think about what was really happening. Most people don't," Naomi replied. "That's the problem. These biases are so ingrained, so automatic, that people don't even realize they're doing it. But that doesn't make it acceptable. We have to do better." She turned her attention to the flight crew. Vincent stood nearby, his expression pained. Bethany was crying quietly near the galley. Terrence and Rodrigo, the security officers, looked uncomfortable. "Vincent," Naomi said, "I want a full written report of this incident on my desk by tomorrow morning. Include statements from everyone involved." "Yes, ma'am," Vincent said immediately. "Of course, Bethany." Naomi continued, looking at the tearful flight attendant. "You made assumptions about me. From the moment I boarded, you questioned my boarding pass. You suggested calling security before you'd even verified the facts. Why? Bethany's voice trembled. I don't know. I looked at you, and at her, and I automatically believed her. I'm so sorry, Miss Fletcher. I was completely wrong. You need to understand something, Naomi said, not unkindly but firmly. When you work in service, people trust you to be fair, to be professional, to treat everyone equally. Today you failed at that, not because you're a bad person, but because you let unconscious bias dictate your actions. That can't happen again. It won't, Bethany promised. I swear it won't. Naomi turned to the security officers. Terrence, Rodrigo, you were prepared to remove me from this aircraft. A paying passenger with the correct ticket. You didn't verify the facts. You didn't question the assumptions everyone was making. You just saw a black woman in first class, causing a commotion, and decided she must be the problem. Terrence shifted uncomfortably. Mom, we were following standard procedures. Then, your procedures are flawed, Naomi said bluntly, because they allowed racial bias to supersede common sense. I had my boarding pass, I had my identification, but none of that mattered, because everyone had already decided I didn't belong. That's unacceptable. Rodrigo spoke up quietly. You're right. We should have handled this differently. We will learn from this. See that you do, Naomi said. Because this isn't just about me. How many other passengers have been treated this way? How many people have been removed from planes or denied service because of the color of their skin? We have to do better, all of us. She sat back down in seat 2A, finally, and took a deep breath. The entire cabin remained silent. The energy had shifted completely. What had started as a routine flight had become a lesson in bias, privilege, and the everyday racism that permeates American life. Vincent approached Naomi quietly. Miss Fletcher, what would you like us to do about Miss Palmer? Naomi considered the question. Don't remove her from the flight. Let her fly in her assigned seat. But I want to speak with her when we land. She needs to understand the full impact of what she did today. Of course, Vincent agreed. Whatever you think is appropriate. The rest of the boarding process continued in near silence. Economy class passengers filtered through first class on their way to their seats, unaware of what had just transpired. Judith Palmer sat hunched in seat 8C, her face buried in her hands. Other first-class passengers avoided eye contact with Naomi, ashamed of their earlier judgments. As the plane prepared for departure, Bethany approached Naomi one more time. Miss Fletcher, can I get you anything? Champagne, orange juice, water? Water, please, Naomi said. Bethany returned quickly with a bottle of premium water and a glass with ice. Her hands shook slightly as she poured. Again, I'm truly sorry. I let you down. I let the company down. Naomi looked at her seriously. Bethany, I'm not going to fire you, but I am going to require you and every other employee to undergo comprehensive bias training. This incident has shown me that we have work to do. As a company, as a team, we need to examine our assumptions and do better. Thank you, Bethany whispered. I won't waste this chance. The plane began to taxi toward the runway. Naomi looked out her window, watching the Atlanta skyline recede. She felt exhausted, emotionally drained from the confrontation. But she also felt something else, a sense of purpose. This incident, as painful as it had been, could become a catalyst for real change. She pulled out her laptop and began drafting an email to her executive team. Subject line: Mandatory Company-Wide Bias Training and Policy Review. She described the morning's events in detail, not to shame individuals but to illustrate systemic problems that needed addressing. We pride ourselves on providing exceptional service, she typed. But service means nothing if it's not extended equally to all passengers regardless of race. Today I experienced firsthand how our systems can fail when unconscious bias goes unchecked. Effective immediately, we will implement comprehensive training for all employees. We will review our passenger interaction protocols, and we will create a passenger bill of rights that enshrines the dignity and respect every person deserves. As the plane lifted off, Naomi felt the familiar sensation of flight. Shed always loved this moment, when the earth fell away and anything seemed possible. Today, that feeling carried extra weight. Shed built this airline to create opportunities, to prove that a black woman could succeed in an industry dominated by white men. But her mission was bigger than just business success. It was about creating spaces where everyone truly belonged. The flight leveled off at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Naomi unbuckled and stood, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. She made her way to the galley area where Vincent and Bethany were preparing beverage service. "Vincent, I need to speak with the entire first-class crew," Naomi said. "Now, please." Vincent nodded quickly. Of course. He used the internal communication system to call the other flight attendants working first class. Within minutes, 3 flight attendants gathered in the galley. Bethany, a young man named Wesley, and an older woman named Darlene. "I want to be very clear about something," Naomi began, keeping her voice low enough that passengers couldn't hear, but firm enough to convey her seriousness. "What happened today cannot happen again. Not on my airline. Not on any flight." All 3 flight attendants nodded, their faces reflecting various degrees of shame and understanding. "Bethany, you've already apologized, and I appreciate that. But I need to understand your thought process. When you saw me standing next to a white passenger who claimed my seat, what went through your mind?" Bethany swallowed hard. "Honestly, I looked at you both, and I just automatically believed she was telling the truth. I didn't question her. I didn't ask for her boarding pass first. I went straight to doubting you, and am horrified at myself for that." "Why?" Naomi pressed. "Why did you automatically believe her?" "Because," Bethany's voice broke, "because she looked like someone who belongs in first class, and you didn't. And that's awful, and am so ashamed, but that's the truth." Naomi nodded slowly. "Thank you for being honest. That's the first step. Recognizing the bias is essential to fixing it." She turned to Wesley and Darlene. "You two weren't directly involved, but you were on this aircraft. Did either of you notice what was happening?" Darlene spoke up. "I heard the commotion, but I was busy with boarding in the back. By the time I understood what was going on, Vincent was handling it." Wesley admitted quietly. "I saw part of it, and am ashamed to say I didn't intervene. I thought about it, but I convinced myself it wasn't my place." "It is your place," Naomi said. "Every employee of this airline has a responsibility to ensure fair treatment of passengers. Silence in the face of injustice is complicity." "You're right," Wesley agreed. "I should have said something." Vincent cleared his throat. "Miss Fletcher, I take full responsibility for this situation. As purser on this flight, the crew's actions reflect on me. I should have recognized what was happening immediately." "Vincent, you ultimately did the right thing," Naomi acknowledged. "But it took too long. My question is, what systemic changes do we need to prevent this from happening again?" Vincent thought carefully. "We need training, obviously, but more than that, we need clear protocols. When there's a seating dispute, we should verify tickets from both parties immediately, not make assumptions about who's telling the truth based on appearance." "Exactly," Naomi said. "We also need to examine how we hire and train our staff. Are we cultivating a culture of inclusion, or are we unconsciously perpetuating bias?" She pulled out a small notebook. I'm going to implement several immediate changes. First, mandatory unconscious bias training for every employee, from gate agents to flight crew to executives. Second, a review of all our customer service protocols through an equity lens. Third, the creation of a passenger advocacy position that reports directly to me. The flight attendants listened intently as Naomi continued outlining her vision for a more equitable airline. I also want to establish an incident reporting system, Naomi added. Not just for passengers to report problems, but for employees to flag situations where they witness bias or discrimination. With protection from retaliation, of course. That's an excellent idea, Darlene said. Sometimes we see things happen but don't feel empowered to speak up. That changes now, Naomi said firmly. Every voice matters. Every perspective is valuable. We're going to build a culture where people feel safe addressing these issues. She looked at each crew member in turn. I'm not going to fire anyone over today's incident, but I am going to hold everyone accountable for doing better. This is a learning moment for all of us. The question is, are we going to learn from it? Yes, ma'am, they chorused. Good. Now, Vincent, when we land, I want you to personally escort Miss Palmer to a private area in the terminal. I'll speak with her there, and I want statements from everyone who witnessed what happened, passengers included. We're going to document this thoroughly. Understood, Vincent said. Naomi returned to her seat, mentally exhausted but resolved. She noticed several first-class passengers watching her. Hugh from 1B caught her eye and looked away quickly, his face red. The woman in 5A, Vivian, gave her a small nod of respect. A businessman across the aisle cleared his throat. Miss Fletcher. His name was Roland, and he looked uncomfortable. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I watched what happened, and I didn't speak up. I should have. Thank you for saying that, Naomi replied. The question is, next time you see something like this, will you speak up? Yes, Roland said firmly. I will. I promise. Over the next hour, several other passengers approached Naomi with apologies. Some were genuine, reflecting real remorse and commitment to change. Others felt performative, as if people were apologizing because she was the CEO, not because they truly understood the harm of their actions. But Naomi accepted them all, graciously. Change had to start somewhere. She spent the rest of the flight working on her laptop, drafting policies, researching bias training programs, and planning the comprehensive overhaul her company needed. This incident, as painful as it had been, was going to serve as a catalyst for real, meaningful change. When the plane began its descent into New York, Naomi put away her laptop and looked out the window. The Manhattan skyline came into view, glittering in the late morning sun. She'd come to New York to sign a major expansion deal, one that would grow her fleet by 15 aircraft. That meeting suddenly seemed less important than the work she now knew she had to do. The plane touched down at JFK, with barely a bump. Naomi remained seated as other first-class passengers gathered their belongings. Several of them glanced at her as they passed, some nodding respectfully, others avoiding eye contact entirely. Hugh from 1B paused at her row. Miss Fletcher, he said quietly, I owe you a significant apology. I was completely wrong in how I reacted. I have a daughter at home, and I realized today that I don't want her growing up in a world where this kind of thing is normal. I'm going to do better. Naomi looked up at him. Mr. Hugh Brennan, he supplied. Mr. Brennan, I appreciate you saying that. The fact that you're thinking about your daughter is good. But I want you to think about something else, too. You shouldn't need to have a daughter to care about how women are treated. You shouldn't need to have black friends or family members to care about racism. These are human issues, and they should matter to you simply because other humans are being hurt. Hugh nodded slowly. You're absolutely right. Thank you for that perspective. After most passengers had deplaned, Naomi gathered her bag and walked through the aircraft. As she passed through economy, she saw Judith Palmer still sitting in 8C, staring at her lap. Naomi paused. Miss Palmer, please wait in the terminal. Someone will direct you where to meet me. Judith looked up with red, swollen eyes. Yes, of course. Miss Fletcher, I will talk soon, Naomi said, not unkindly, and continued down the aisle. Vincent met her at the aircraft door. Miss Fletcher, I've arranged a private conference room in the terminal. Miss Palmer will be escorted there. Is there anything else you need? Yes, Naomi said. I need you to gather contact information for all the first-class passengers who were present during the incident. I want to follow up with them. Already done, Vincent said, handing her a tablet. I compiled the list during the flight. Thank you, Vincent. That was good thinking. Naomi made her way through the jet bridge into JFK's Terminal 4. Despite the early hour, the terminal buzzed with activity. Travelers rushing to make connections, families reuniting, business people typing frantically on laptops in gate areas. Normal airport chaos. But Naomi felt anything but normal. A Skyward Elite gate agent met her just inside the terminal. Miss Fletcher, Trina. I'll escort you to the conference room. They walked through the terminal, past shops and restaurants, past travelers who had no idea they were walking beside the woman who owned one of the airlines they might fly. Naomi found herself looking at faces differently now. How many of these people had experienced what Shed experienced this morning? How many had been judged, dismissed, or mistreated based solely on their appearance? The conference room was small but private, with a table, several chairs, and a window overlooking the tarmac. Naomi could see Skyward Elite aircraft being serviced, loaded, prepared for their next flights. Her aircraft. Her dream made tangible. She sat down and pulled out her phone. Several urgent messages waited. Her assistant wanted to know if she was still on schedule for the afternoon meeting. Her CFO needed to discuss quarterly projections. Her head of operations had questions about the expansion plan. But all of that would have to wait. Naomi opened her notes app and began documenting everything that had happened that morning, every detail fresh in her mind. The dismissive gate agent, the prolonged security screening, Francine's skeptical tone, Judith Palmer's entitled smirk, Hugh's automatic assumption, Bethany's bias, the security officers ready to remove her. She wrote it all down, not out of vindictiveness, but because these details mattered. They painted a picture of systemic failure that needed to be addressed. A knock on the door interrupted her writing. Trina opened it to reveal Judith Palmer, looking small and defeated. Her expensive clothes were rumpled now. Her perfect hair mussed. She'd been crying. Please sit down, Miss Palmer, Naomi said, gesturing to a chair across the table. Judith sat, clutching her handbag in her lap like a shield. Miss Fletcher, I don't even know where to begin apologizing. Let's start with understanding, Naomi said. I want to understand why you did what you did, and I want you to understand the impact of your actions. Judith nodded, tears welling up again. I've been thinking about it the whole flight, and the truth is, I felt entitled to that seat. I saw it was empty, and I just sat down. When you came and said it was yours, my first thought wasn't that I'd made a mistake. It was that you must be wrong, and that's horrible. Why did you think I was wrong? Naomi asked. Because, Judith's voice dropped to barely a whisper, because you're black. And I've never questioned my place in spaces like first class. I've always belonged everywhere I wanted to be. So when you challenged me, I couldn't imagine that I was in the wrong. I must have unconsciously thought that someone like me belonged there more than someone like you. The honesty was painful, but necessary. Naomi leaned forward. Miss Palmer, do you understand what you did to me today? I humiliated you, Judith said, tears streaming now. I made you justify your presence. I questioned your worth. I treated you as less than human. Yes, Naomi said simply. And you didn't do it alone. Everyone else in that cabin made the same assumptions you did. They saw your whiteness as legitimacy, and my blackness as suspicion. That's what systemic racism looks like. It's not just hate, it's automatic assumptions that privilege white people and disadvantage everyone else. Judith covered her face with her hands. I'm so ashamed. I've always thought of myself as a good person, but good people don't do what I did. Good people make mistakes, Naomi said. The question is what they do afterward. Are you willing to learn from this? Judith looked up, her mascara streaked down her cheeks. Yes. God. Yes. Whatever I need to do. I'll do anything. Naomi slid a business card across the table. This is for a racial equity training organization I work with. They offer workshops for individuals who want to understand and address their biases. I want you to attend their next session. Judith took the card with shaking hands. I will. Absolutely. I also want you to write an account of what happened today. Not for me, but for yourself. Really examine your thoughts, your assumptions, your actions, and then I want you to share it. Not to humiliate yourself, but to educate others. Because you're not alone in having these biases. Millions of people share them. And the only way we create change is by being honest about the problem. I'll do it, Judith promised. I'll write it all down. And I'll share it. Naomi studied her. For a long moment, she could destroy Judith Palmer if she wanted to. One social media post, one mention of her name, and Judith's life would be turned upside down by internet outrage. But that wasn't justice. That was revenge. And revenge didn't create lasting change. Miss Palmer, I'm not going to publicly shame you. I'm not going to ruin your reputation. But I am going to hold you accountable for becoming better. Can you commit to that? Yes, Judith said fervently. I swear. This has been the worst day of my life, but also, maybe the most important. You could have had me arrested. You could have destroyed me. Instead, you're giving me a chance to learn and grow. I won't waste it. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Judith asked quietly, Can I ask you something? Go ahead. How do you do it? How do you face this every day and not become bitter? Not hate people like me. Naomi took a breath. Because bitterness would destroy me. Not change the system. And because I believe people can learn. I've seen it happen. My job isn't to hate you. It's to make sure the next black woman who flies first class doesn't have to go through what I went through today. Judith nodded, absorbing this. You're remarkable. Thank you for your grace. After Judith left, Naomi sat alone in the conference room for a long time. She felt drained, emotionally spent. But she also felt something else. A sense of purpose crystallizing. This morning had been traumatic. Yes. But it had also been clarifying. She knew exactly what she needed to do next. She picked up her phone and called her executive assistant. Meredith, I need to reschedule this afternoon's meetings. Something's come up. Something important. 3 months after the incident on Flight 447, Skyward Elite Airlines looked different. Not in physical appearance, but in culture, in consciousness, in commitment to equity. Naomi stood in the company's Atlanta headquarters, looking at the presentation slides her training director had prepared. Unconscious bias in aviation, creating an inclusive culture. Every Skyward Elite employee had now completed this 8-hour training program. Gate agents, flight attendants, pilots, mechanics, executives, everyone. The training wasn't just theoretical, It included real scenarios, including a detailed case study of what had happened on that morning flight to New York. Naomi had authorized the use of her own experience as a teaching tool, removing names but preserving the essential details. If her pain could educate others and prevent similar incidents, it was worth it. The feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, her training director reported. Employees are saying this is the most impactful professional development they've ever received. Several have told me it's changed how they interact with passengers and colleagues. Naomi nodded. Good. But training is just the beginning. I want to see evidence of changed behavior. Metrics. Are we seeing fewer passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment? Are our diversity numbers improving in hiring and promotions? Yes, on both counts. Her HR director chimed in. Complaints are down 37%. And we've hired a significantly more diverse cohort in our last recruitment cycle. We're also seeing better retention among employees of color, which suggests they feel more valued and supported. The changes extended beyond training. Skyward Elite had implemented a new passenger Bill of Rights that explicitly prohibited discrimination and outlined clear procedures for handling disputes. They'd created an ombudsman position to investigate complaints and ensure accountability. They'd revised their hiring practices to reduce bias in recruitment. Naomi had also established a diversity advisory council made up of employees at all levels. Their job was to identify problems, propose solutions, and hold leadership accountable. The council met monthly, and Naomi attended every meeting. The incident had also sparked broader industry conversations. Naomi had been invited to speak at the Aviation Leadership Conference, where Shed delivered a keynote address titled Flying While Black: Confronting Racism in Air Travel. The speech had gone viral, viewed millions of times online, sparking discussions at airlines across the country. Some companies had reached out to ask about Skyward Elite's training program. Naomi had been generous with her knowledge, believing that improving one airline helped everyone who flew. Racism in aviation was an industry problem, not just a Skyward Elite problem. Tonight, Naomi was hosting a community dialogue event at a hotel conference center in Atlanta. The topic, dignity in transit, race, class, and belonging in travel spaces. Over 300 people had registered to attend: travelers, airline employees, activists, academics, people who cared about making air travel more equitable. Naomi arrived at the venue early to check the setup. Rows of chairs faced a small stage with a panel table. Screens on either side would show slides and video clips. Everything looked professional and welcoming. As attendees filed in, Naomi greeted many of them personally. She recognized several Skyward Elite employees, including Vincent, Bethany, and Terrence. She was glad they'd come. Their willingness to engage with difficult conversations showed real commitment to change. Then she saw a familiar face in the third row. Judith Palmer. She was dressed more simply than she'd been on that flight, less ostentatious. She caught Naomi's eye and gave a small, uncertain wave. Naomi nodded in acknowledgement. The event began with Naomi sharing her story. She didn't spare details, describing the humiliation, the anger, the exhaustion of having to prove her worth. The audience listened in rapt attention. Many people of color nodded in recognition. They'd lived similar experiences. This wasn't an isolated incident, Naomi told the crowd. It was a symptom of systemic bias that permeates every aspect of society, including how we travel. The question is, what are we going to do about it? The panel discussion that followed included a civil rights attorney, a sociology professor specializing in racial equity, and a fellow airline CEO. They talked about implicit bias, structural racism, the history of segregation in transportation, and the work still needed to create truly inclusive spaces. During the Q&A portion, hands shot up throughout the audience. People had questions, stories to share, ideas to contribute. The energy was electric, passionate, hopeful. Then Judith Palmer raised her hand. Naomi hesitated only a moment before calling on her. Yes, the woman in the blue jacket. Judith stood, her voice shaking. My name is Judith Palmer. 3 months ago, I was the woman who stole Miss Fletcher's seat on that flight. A ripple of shock went through the audience. People turned to look at Judith. Some faces showed curiosity, others judgment. I want to say publicly what I did was wrong, Judith continued. I acted out of entitlement and prejudice. I assumed I belonged in first class, and Miss Fletcher didn't, based solely on the color of our skin. Miss Fletcher could have destroyed my reputation. Instead, she gave me a chance to learn and grow. Judith's voice grew stronger. I've spent the last 3 months educating myself. I've read books. I've attended workshops. I've had uncomfortable conversations with my friends and family. And I've come to understand how deeply racism is embedded in our society and in my own thinking. She turned to face Naomi directly. Miss Fletcher, thank you for your grace. And to everyone here, I want to say, check your biases. Question your assumptions. They hurt real people. Don't wait until you're publicly called out like I was. Do the work now. Judith sat down, wiping tears from her eyes. The audience was silent for a moment, then began to applaud. Not everyone joined in. Some people clearly felt Judith didn't deserve praise for doing what she should have done all along. But many appreciated her willingness to be vulnerable and accountable. Naomi addressed the audience. What Miss Palmer just did took courage. It's not easy to admit our mistakes publicly. But that vulnerability is essential for growth. We all have biases. The question is whether we're willing to acknowledge them and work to change. The event concluded with a standing ovation. People lingered afterward, networking, exchanging contact information, continuing conversations. Naomi spoke with dozens of attendees, hearing their stories, answering questions, feeling energized by the collective commitment to change. As the crowd thinned, Judith approached hesitantly. Miss Fletcher, thank you for letting me speak. How have you been? Naomi asked. Better, Judith said honestly. It's been hard. I've lost some friends who didn't want to hear what I was learning. But I've also gained new perspectives and new relationships. I'm volunteering now with an organization that combats housing discrimination, trying to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. That's good, Naomi said. Keep doing the work. I will, Judith promised. For the rest of my life. 6 months after the incident, Naomi Fletcher stood backstage at the TED conference in Vancouver. Her palms were slightly sweaty, her heart beating faster than usual. In a few minutes, she would walk onto one of the world's most famous stages and share her story with thousands of people in the audience and millions more who would watch online. The stage manager gave her a reassuring smile. 2 minutes, Miss Fletcher. You're going to be amazing. Naomi took a deep breath. She'd given hundreds of presentations in her career, pitched to demanding investors, spoken at industry conferences. But this felt different. This wasn't about business metrics or growth projections. This was about justice, dignity, and the ongoing fight for equality. The host introduced her with a glowing biography that highlighted her achievements. MIT graduate, aerospace engineer, founder and CEO of Skyward Elite Airlines, one of Forbes' most powerful women in business. But Naomi knew that none of those credentials had protected her that morning on Flight 447. Success hadn't shielded her from racism. Money hadn't bought her immunity from bias. She walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause. The iconic red circle marked her spot. The lights were bright. The audience a sea of faces. Naomi smiled, waiting for the applause to fade, then began to speak. 6 months ago, I was almost thrown off my own airplane. She let the statement hang in the air. Confusion rippled through the audience. How could someone be thrown off their own airplane? Naomi told the story. Every detail. The questioning at check-in. The prolonged security screening. Judith Palmer stealing her seat. The assumptions, the bias, the moment when security was called. And finally, the revelation that changed everything. When I told them I was the CEO, that I owned the airline, the reaction was immediate. Naomi said, shock, disbelief, shame. Because nobody had imagined that the black woman in first class could possibly be the person in charge. She paused, making eye contact with different sections of the audience. But here's the thing. I shouldn't have needed to be the CEO for them to treat me with respect. The woman sitting next to me in coach, the man in the last row of economy, the teenager flying for the first time, they all deserved the same dignity I deserved. Not because of our titles or our bank accounts, but because we're human beings. Naomi spoke about implicit bias, about how it operates below our conscious awareness, shaping our assumptions and actions. She talked about systemic racism in aviation and beyond. She shared statistics about how passengers of color are disproportionately questioned, searched, and removed from flights. But I don't want to just identify the problem, Naomi said. I want to talk about solutions. Because we can do better. We must do better. She outlined the changes Skyward Elite had implemented. The training programs. The policy revisions. The accountability mechanisms. The commitment to diversity at every level of the organization. Some people asked me why I didn't just ban Judith Palmer from flying my airline forever, Naomi said. Why I gave her a chance to learn instead of simply punishing her. And my answer is this. Punishment feels good in the moment. It satisfies our desire for justice. But punishment alone doesn't create lasting change. She spoke about her conversation with Judith, about the woman's genuine remorse and commitment to growth. I'm not saying we should excuse racism or bigotry. We absolutely shouldn't. But I am saying that if we want to transform society, we need to believe that people can change. We need to create pathways for growth, not just mechanisms for punishment. Naomi's voice grew stronger, more passionate. I built Skyward Elite because I wanted to prove that a black woman could succeed in an industry that had excluded people who looked like me. But somewhere along the way, my mission became bigger than just personal success. It became about creating spaces where everyone truly belongs, where nobody has to prove their worth before being treated with dignity. She talked about her mother. Wood cleaned hotel rooms her whole life. Wood taught Naomi to be proud of who she was, even when the world tried to diminish her. My mother used to say, "Baby, they can't take your dignity unless you give it to them." That morning on Flight 447, I refused to give it away. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. They tried to take my seat, Naomi said, her voice ringing out clear and strong. But they couldn't take my dignity. They tried to diminish me, to make me small, to put me in what they thought was my place. But I rose higher. I stood up not just for myself, but for every black woman, every person of color, every individual who's been told they don't belong. She spoke about the broader implications, about how these everyday acts of bias accumulate, wearing people down, limiting opportunities, perpetuating inequality. But here's what gives me hope, Naomi continued. Change is possible. I've seen it. In my employees who completed bias training and genuinely transformed how they interact with passengers. In Judith Palmer, who did the difficult work of confronting her prejudices. In the passengers who apologized and committed to speaking up next time they witness injustice. Naomi looked directly into the camera that was broadcasting her talk around the world. If you're watching this, and you're a young black girl who dreams of being a CEO, or a pilot, or an astronaut, or anything else people tell you is ente for someone like you, I want you to know something. Your seat is waiting. At the front of the plane. In first class. In the boardroom. Wherever you want to be. And you don't have to prove you deserve it. You deserve it simply by being you. Her voice dropped, becoming more intimate. To everyone else, I ask you to examine your assumptions. When you see a black person in a space of privilege, don't automatically question whether they belong. When you witness someone being treated unfairly, speak up. Use your privilege, your voice, your power to create change. Because this isn't just about me, or Judith Palmer, or one incident on one airplane. This is about the kind of world we want to build together. Naomi paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the audience. I didn't just build an airline, she said finally. I built a movement. A movement toward true equality. Toward genuine inclusion. Toward a world where nobody has to fight just to claim the space they've paid for. Earned. Deserve. Her final words resonated through the auditorium. They thought they could push me back into my place. Instead, I expanded what's possible. For me, for my company, for everyone who comes after me. So to every person watching who's been told you don't belong, remember this. You do belong. You always have. And together, we're going to make sure the world recognizes that truth. The audience erupted into a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. People were crying, cheering, on their feet, applauding. The ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes, wave after wave of appreciation and recognition. As Naomi walked off stage, she felt tears on her own cheeks. Not tears of sadness or anger, but tears of release, of purpose fulfilled, of a message delivered that needed to be heard. Backstage, people crowded around to congratulate her. TED organizers called it one of the most powerful talks in the conference's history. Media outlets requested interviews. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends, colleagues, strangers, who'd watched the live stream. But the message that meant the most came from an unknown number. Miss Fletcher, you don't know me. I'm a 19-year-old black college student studying aviation. I watched your TED Talk and I cried. I've been told I don't belong in this field so many times I almost quit. But after hearing you speak, I'm not quitting. I'm going to become a pilot. And someday, maybe I'll fly for Skyward Elite. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for winning. Thank you for showing me it's possible. Naomi read the message twice, her heart full. This was why Shed shared her story. This was why Shed turned her pain into purpose. Not for herself, but for every young person who needed to see someone who looked like them succeeding, thriving, refusing to be diminished. She typed a response. Don't just dream of flying for Skyward Elite. Dream of owning your own airline. Dream bigger than you ever thought possible. And when people tell you it can't be done, prove them wrong. Your seat is waiting. 3 years after the incident, Skyward Elite Airlines had doubled in size. The company now operated 47 aircraft, employed over 2,000 people, and was consistently rated as one of the most inclusive airlines in America. Naomi had been featured on the cover of Time magazine, had won numerous awards for leadership and diversity, and had been invited to advise other companies on building equitable cultures. But the measure of success Naomi valued most wasn't revenue or recognition. It was the letters she received from passengers of color who told her they finally felt safe and respected when they flew. It was the employees who thanked her for creating a workplace where they could bring their whole selves. It was the young black girl who'd sent that message after the TED Talk and was now in flight school, one step closer to her dream. Judith Palmer had kept her promise. Shed completed multiple racial equity training programs, volunteered with civil rights organizations, and had written a powerful essay about her experience that was published in a major newspaper. She and Naomi weren't friends, exactly, but they'd developed a mutual respect. Judith had done the work, genuinely changed, and was using her privilege to advocate for others. The incident on Flight 447 had become a case study taught in business schools and diversity training programs across the country, not as a story of victimhood, but as a story of resistance, transformation, and the power of turning pain into purpose. Naomi stood in her corner office in Skyward Elite's headquarters, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. On her desk sat a framed photo of her mother, taken years ago when Naomi had graduated from MIT. Her mother wore her Sunday best, her smile proud and hopeful, believing in her daughter's impossible dreams. "I did it, Mama," Naomi whispered to the photo. "Not just the airline, not just the success. I changed things. I made it a little bit better for the ones coming after me." She thought about all the young black girls and boys who would fly on her planes, who would see employees who looked like them, who would never know the humiliation Shed experienced, because Shed fought to make sure they wouldn't have to. That was the real victory. Not the money or the fame or even the satisfaction of proving doubters wrong. The real victory was in creating a world where the next generation wouldn't have to fight as hard to belong. So here's my question for you, and I really want you to think about it. Have you ever witnessed something like this? Have you ever seen someone being treated unfairly because of how they look, and you stayed silent? Or maybe you've experienced it yourself. Drop your story in the comments. Let's talk about it, because these conversations are how we create change. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently, if it inspired you to speak up next time you see injustice, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel because we're going to keep telling stories that matter, stories that need to be heard, stories that have the power to change hearts and minds. And share this video. Send it to someone who needs to hear Naomi's message. Post it on your social media. Because the more people who understand what everyday racism looks like, the more allies we create in the fight for equality. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring enough to stick with this story all the way to the end. Remember, your voice matters. Your actions matter. Together, we can build a world where everyone truly belongs. Where nobody has to prove their worth before being treated with dignity. Where seats at the front of the plane, and the boardroom, and everywhere else are open to anyone with the courage to claim them. Until next time, keep standing up for what's right. Keep speaking out against injustice. Keep believing that change is possible, because people like Naomi Fletcher prove that it is. She didn't just reclaim her seat, she transformed an entire industry. And that's the power each of us has when we refuse to stay silent. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story. This story teaches us that dignity cannot be measured by titles or bank accounts. Naomi Fletcher's experience reveals how deeply implicit bias shapes our interactions, often without conscious awareness. The most powerful lesson is that respect should never require credentials. Every human being deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their race, appearance, or perceived status. We learn that silence in the face of injustice makes us complicit. The passengers who witnessed discrimination but said nothing enabled the harm to continue. Speaking up requires courage, but it's essential for creating change. We also see that transformation is possible when people confront their biases honestly. Judith Palmer's journey from entitled bigotry to genuine growth shows that accountability combined with education can lead to real change. The story demonstrates that systemic change requires more than individual awareness. Naomi didn't just address one incident. She transformed her entire organization through comprehensive training, new policies, and accountability structures. This teaches us that creating equitable spaces demands intentional, sustained effort at every level. Perhaps most importantly, we learn that pain can become purpose. Naomi transformed her humiliation into a catalyst for industry-wide change, proving that our greatest challenges can become our most powerful platforms for advocacy. Her refusal to accept mistreatment didn't just reclaim her seat. It expanded possibilities for everyone who follows. What would you have done in Naomi's situation? Would you have revealed your identity immediately? Or would you have handled it differently? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below because I'm genuinely curious to hear your perspective. Have you ever experienced or witnessed racial discrimination while traveling? Share your story in the comments. Your voice matters, and your experience could help someone else feel less alone. Let's create a space where we can talk openly about these issues. If this story impacted you, if it made you see bias differently, or if it inspired you to speak up next time you witness injustice, show your support by hitting that like button right now. Every like helps this message reach more people who need to hear it. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications because we're committed to sharing stories that challenge prejudice, celebrate resilience, and inspire real change. These aren't just entertainment. They're conversations that can transform how we see the world and treat each other. Share this video with someone who needs to hear Naomi's message. Post it on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever your voice can reach others. Because the more people understand what everyday racism looks like, the more allies we create in the fight for equality. Thank you for watching until the very end. Thank you for caring enough to engage with difficult topics. Thank you for being part of a community that believes dignity and respect should be universal, not conditional. Remember, you have power. Your voice, your actions, your willingness to stand up for what's right, all of it matters. Together, we can build a world where nobody has to prove their worth before being treated like a human being. Stay strong, speak truth, and never stop fighting for justice. I'll see you in the next story, and until then, keep making a difference wherever you are.